So, to address the question, is Australia a racist country? Please welcome Rabbi Shoshana Kaminsky.
Hello. So, I'm actually gonna, now that I've got the microphone, gonna take the next 10 minutes or so, maybe 15, just to give, I'll just stand back a little bit, just to give I'm gonna give you an overview of Judaism, because my expectation in speaking to almost any Christian audience is that Christians oftentimes believe that they know what Judaism is, but they don't. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit about Judaism. Then I'm going to come back and talk about the topic, is Australia a racist country? And we'll have a conversation about that topic. So many years ago, when I was a rabbi in Western Pennsylvania, I had a lady approach me after a talk, and she said, "I love the Jews because you are the people of the Old Testament." And I thought, this is fantastic. I could spend the next 25 years talking about everything that's wrong in that statement. And so here it is 25 years later, and I'm still talking. So yes, Jews, the people of the Old Testament. No. So first of all, we don't use the term Old Testament, we use the term Hebrew Bible. Because if we say Old Testament, then that makes us sound very sad, because we haven't cottoned on to the New Testament yet. We're still stuck in the Old Testament. So we call it the Hebrew Bible. But we're also not the people of the Hebrew Bible. If you read the Hebrew Bible, and specifically the first 5 books, which we call the Torah, or the teaching, that covers the early history of the Jewish people from Abraham and Sarah to the death of Moses at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, then you see that Judaism, especially in the 3rd book, the book of Leviticus, the one that Christians never read, except for chapter 19, maybe, that God wants to be worshipped with sacrifices. So you'll build a place in Jerusalem that's the temple, and that's where the sacrifices are offered. So 3 times a day, you bring a sacrifice, an animal in the morning, and an animal in the evening, some flour mixed with oil in the afternoon. You bring an extra sacrifice on the Sabbath, on Saturday. On our holiest day, the Day of Atonement, which was only a week and a half ago, you bring 5 offerings for this special day. If you have sinned and you want to repent, you bring the sacrifice. If you want to take a vow, and your vow is fulfilled, you bring a sacrifice. And so for every occasion, you bring a sacrifice, and you don't offer the sacrifice. The priest brings the sacrifice. So these are the male descendants of Aaron. And so it's all about who your lineage is. It has nothing to do with whether you're a nice person, whether you're smart. If you are the direct male descendant of Aaron, you can be a priest. And if you're not, then you can't be. And this is how it continues up until the time of Jesus. So you know the story of Jesus throwing the moneylenders out of the temple. So that was still how Judaism was practiced in his time. But it was not long after he died that the Jews made the really fatal mistake of rebelling against the Roman Empire. Never rebel against the Roman Empire. And they were crushed by the Romans, and in the midst of that crushing, they destroyed the temple and forbade the Jews from living in Jerusalem, so they couldn't rebuild the temple. And at this point, Judaism reinvents itself. And so the priests are out of a job. They continue to trace their lineage. I just had a wedding on Sunday where there was a guy named Des Cohen who traces his lineage all the way back to the ancient priests, and he was a mate of the bride and the groom, and he offered the priestly blessing that may the Lord bless you and keep you. So he offered that as a descendant of the priests. But really, the religious leadership was taken over by the rabbis. And by the way, the predecessors of the rabbis, the Pharisees. My people, the Pharisees. So the next time you read something about how terrible the Pharisees are, think of me. And remember that even the Christian Bible had the authors of the Gospels had a bit of an axe to grind. And so the rabbis decreed that from now on, worship of the altar has been replaced by worship of the heart. And so the sacrifices were replaced by prayer. We move out of the temple and into the synagogue and the home. And nearly all of our celebrations, our festivals, have a home-based component and a synagogue-based component. So the Sabbath, which happens each and every week, from Friday at sundown until Saturday after dark, we celebrate in the synagogue, we celebrate at home. There's a few exceptions, but mostly we celebrate with our families, with our loved ones, with our friends, and we also join together in the synagogue. Something else that makes Judaism really, really different from Christianity is we are not a dogmatic religion. And I don't think we ever really have been. So, I like to joke that Deuteronomy chapter 6, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, that's the one sentence that we can all agree on. But even then, I know Jews who actually don't believe in God at all. But they very much value their connection to other Jews. And so sociologists describe Judaism as about belonging rather than believing. Christianity is about believing. And you look at the number of denominations and all the different little teeny slices of belief, and the idea of having those family connections start to make, start to have a certain appeal, especially because we have been a persecuted people for the last at least 1,500 years. And so it was the greatest value was to stay connected. And to continue to value our family connection. So in South Australia, we are a tiny, tiny, tiny minority. My guess is that if you looked at every Jewish person who comes to any Jewish event in Adelaide, even just one during the year, it's probably between 400 and 500 people total in the state of 1.5 million. So a tiny minority, and that's why that sense of connectedness, rather than asking detailed questions about belief, is really significant. And the last difference that I'll highlight is that we actually are fairly agnostic about what happens to us after we die. And so I'd like to believe that I'm going to live on after this body dies, but I'm actually not sure what's going to happen. And because of that, we are very much focused on this world and on this life. What can I do in this life to make the world a better place, rather than planning on going to heaven and continuing to live forever. So that's a very, very, very quick snippet of Judaism. So now on to the actual topic. Am I still digging, or am I okay? Okay, good. Is Australia a racist country? So I'm just going to cheat and put the question back to you. Do you think that Australia is a racist country? Might start with a show of hands. So if you think Australia is a racist country, put your hand up. Okay. If you think Australia is not a racist country, put your hand up. Okay, so I've got to say the ayes have it here. So that's actually really helpful information for guiding me in my talk. And thank you, Peter, for your introduction and really giving a sense of where your heart is in the matter. I can't remember how long ago I was booked to do this talk. I was actually out of the country for most of the first half of the year, so I think it was just after I returned, maybe in early August, that I was invited to come and speak with you, 2 months later, and could never have imagined how timely this topic would prove in this particular era, as we find ourselves just a few days away from the constitutional referendum. And in my local shops, the Martin Shopping Center, there's an early voting booth center that's been set up, and so my outside of Dan Murphy's is kind of turned into a little bit of a battleground between the yes and the no people. And the no people have the really fancy posters and all of the the cardboard paraphernalia and the pretty T-shirts and the yes people are sort of there with their very simple brochures like, please consider voting yes. And so, it was just yesterday that I went shopping for the first day after the public holiday when the voting booth had opened, and my gosh, it was busy. So yes, do I believe that Australia is a racist country? Yes, I do. And I feel that what has happened in recent months has sadly reinforced my pre-existing beliefs. I had so hoped to see our country rise above the divisions that exist, and instead what I've seen is a reinforcement of those divisions, and I think an effort by some very, very bad actors to exacerbate those divisions and to use them for their advantage. And it's quite distressing. So we've just come out of our holy season. Our holy season is around the equinox, which is on September the 21st. In Australia, I feel like I always have to tell you when the equinox is, because everybody believes that spring begins on the 1st of September, when in fact the vernal equinox is on September the 21st. So at the new moon before September the 21st, we started our Jewish New Year. And that's, and 10 days after that is the Day of Atonement. So it's like if you're a priest, we have at least 2 priests here tonight, what would it be like if you had Christmas and then 10 days later you had Easter? That's what it's like being a rabbi in this first month of the Jewish year. And so I give all my big sermons at this time. And so on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, I spoke about the voice to Parliament. And about how strongly I believe in the voice to Parliament. And I reminded my congregation on that day that this was never intended to be a divisive or political issue. That the group of elders who created the Uluru Statement from the Heart in 2017 and voted on it unanimously saw this as something that would be not controversial and something that Australians could unify around. And I'm not going to mention any names, but certain political figures decided to capitalize upon this constitutional referendum as an opportunity to make some political hay, and have, I believe, sowed divisiveness where there wasn't really any that needed to be sowed. So one of the people that I mentioned in my sermon on Rosh Hashanah, actually one of the very few people I mentioned, was Julian Leeser, who, as you probably know, resigned his position on the Liberal front bench in the government so that he could wholeheartedly go out and support the voice. He has, by the way, a very, very effective website where he has 1-minute videos answering the most frequently asked questions and concerns that people raise about the voice to Parliament. How much power will it have? How much money will it cost? Is it divisive? Is it racist? And so there's these 1-minute videos that address each of those. So if you have somebody that you want to, is looking for some simple answers, then I would invite them to have a look at his website. So Julian Leeser also happens to be a very active member of the Jewish community. And so I'm very happy to claim him. I'm sure if we sat down and had a cup of tea together, there would be many, many things that we would disagree upon. But it has meant a lot to me to see him very upfront and promoting the voice to Parliament. And I would like to let you know that if you don't even have a deep dive, if you have a relatively shallow dive onto the internet and you try Googling voice to Parliament and Jews, you will discover that in fact we are responsible for this constitutional referendum. That this is all part of our plot to replace you white people with people from developing countries, with indigenous people. And I see you smiling, but if you're Jewish, it's not funny. It's really, really not funny. And, and it is, in fact, I will say, disgusting to see, by the way, we're also responsible for COVID. You know that we were responsible for the September 11th attacks. You may have heard that all the Jews didn't show up to work at the World Trade Center. You know, my colleagues in New York performed dozens and dozens of funerals after September 11th, 2001. But no, all the Jews knew to stay home because we were all in on it. And so you know, no, I'm grateful to say this isn't in the mainstream of the arguments about the voice to Parliament, but the fact that there are Australians who are prepared to swallow these ideas, hook, line, and sinker, is one of the reasons why I believe that Australia is a racist nation. If you'd asked me 3 months ago, is Australia a racist nation, I might have said it has that tendency, but I believe we can be better. And what I've seen in recent weeks is, no, we're just getting worse. And I'm fearful about waking up on the 15th of October, however the vote comes out. If the amendment passes, if the amendment doesn't pass, where do we sit as a nation? What do we do with the emotions that have been stirred up in us? So I made the mistake at the shopping center yesterday. I was wearing my yes button. I took it off because I was going to try to fool you into thinking that I was a neutral person. See, I didn't put anything in my bio about, you know, my various political activities over the years because I wanted. But I was wearing my yes button, and I saw this woman wearing this big no t-shirt, and so I just had to have a conversation with her. And I was amazed at how quickly she ramped up the anger. And I'm guessing that many of you have had this experience in recent years of just 1 minute you're calm, and the next minute you're ready to strangle somebody. Has this happened to any of you, or is it just me? Yes, yes. So, and for part of it, actually, I do blame COVID. I really do. I think that we need to reflect on how that deeply traumatic experience has left us changed as people. There was a period from March to about June of 2020 when I was terrified. You know, I had suddenly overnight all control stripped away from me. I had gone from just living my life to not knowing if I was ever going to get to go back to worshiping in person, if I was ever going to get to teach my Sunday school students face-to-face again. You try teaching Sunday school on Zoom. It ain't easy. You know, if I was ever going to get to see my elderly father in the United States again. And I'm sure that each and every one of you had that same experience. And I think that that is still deep inside of us. And of course, we know that what happened in 2020 was an awful lot of people went down that conspiracy rabbit hole around vaccinations, around government conspiracies. Even before that, we had the conspiracies around climate change, a conspiracy by the academics to get grant money. Just think about that for a moment. My neighbor, who was petrified of COVID in 2020, stopped going to the shops. She had her groceries delivered. She was terrified. By the time the vaccines came out a year later, her terror had shifted, and she was no longer afraid of the disease. She was now afraid of vaccines. So she wouldn't get vaccinated. Her elderly grandmother was in a nursing home. She wasn't allowed to visit her because she wasn't vaccinated. And she celebrated a year and a half later when finally the nursing home removed that stupid regulation that had kept her from visiting her grandmother because she wouldn't get that vaccine. And I think that it's that emotionality that is still within us that has allowed dark forces to prey on our own dark tendencies within ourselves to believe the very worst of other people. So if you look at the myths now that are being bandied about Australia's First Nation people and their plot to take over Australia. I had a friend who knows someone who works in a factory setting, and the factory manager called all the workers together and said, you have to vote no, because if you don't, we'll have to pay to go to the beach. So that's, and people believed it. If you don't vote no, they're coming for your homes. They're coming for your towns. They're coming for your property. There's going to be mandated, mandated whatever teachings about First Peoples of Australia, and people are prepared to believe these lies, really, because something quite dark and scary within them has been awakened. And I believe that same force has been awakened in me, which is why it's so easy for me to get angry. So what do we do? What do we do about it? And so listening, this is one of my big, how, I don't know if this is true for everybody, but I think I have 3 sermons. I just give them over and over again. So one of my 3 sermons is the lost art of listening. We are terrible listeners, me included. We are terrible listeners, and especially since the rise of the internet and especially social media, when if you are on Facebook, Instagram, if you go on YouTube, you are fed a steady diet of everything that you already believe. I'm on Facebook. Do you know how many no ads I've seen in Facebook? Guess how many?
0.
0, exactly. Not a 1. Why? Because Facebook's pegged me. I mean, and not that hard to peg. I keep putting up all these bits of supporting the yes vote. But yes, Facebook knows exactly where I stand, so they keep feeding me a steady diet of yes information, because they know that will keep me engaged with Facebook, and that's all Facebook wants. They want my eyes to stay on their website. The same for people who are no voters or anti-vaxxers or climate change deniers. They want them to keep looking at Facebook, and so they feed them a steady diet of what it is that they believe. And what has happened as a result of this is that we are losing the ability to listen to opinions that differ dramatically from our own. A few of us, I think, know Michael Patterson, who's my pastoral supervision guru, who's coming back to Adelaide in a few weeks, and he shares a teaching about the different kinds of listening. So how do we listen? Ideally, we listen to hear what excites the other person, what really engages you. So if you listen and you look for the core of that other human being, you have to be listening on a very, very deep level. You can't just listen with your ears, you have to listen with your whole self. So you might listen to converse, but most of us these days, we listen to interrupt. We listen, and as soon as the other person starts talking, we are drafting a reply in our minds that is going to refute them or is going to agree with them. But we stop listening, because you can't listen and think at the same time. I mean, you can listen and think, but you have to be thinking about what you're listening to. If you're thinking about what you're going to say, you've stopped actively listening. And so that the old style of listening, take a minute, reflect. Yesterday when I saw another volunteer, and he had this big smile on his face, and I said, thank you for that smile. It's just so lovely, because the other no volunteers are grumpy. He was smiling. I said, that's great. It's lovely to see somebody smiling and to be engaging in such a good spirit. So you start with that point of connection. We as a society, we have to relearn how to connect with people who are different from us, because otherwise, woe is us. What happens at the next federal election when we have all gone down our individual rabbit holes and we have lost the ability to remember that our primary focus is what is good for Australia, not what is good for me, what is good for my neighbor, but what is good for the country. So, that's about all I have to say, really. I want to say that just about everyone who believes that Australia is not a racist country, other than Jacinta Price, happens to be white. And the people who I know who are not white have regular experiences of being reminded that they don't actually quite fit in. So I have a very dear friend who's originally from Iran. She's a pharmacist. She works at a pharmacy not too far from here. And there are customers who come in. She works with another pharmacist. And when she comes to take their script, they say, no, I don't want to work with you. I want to work with the other pharmacist, who happens to be a white man. And if you read the literature, you will see that among people who have come to Australia who are not native English speakers, especially people who come from non-white countries, there is an almost universal experience of discrimination, sometimes in very quiet ways. You mentioned the woman who was having trouble pronouncing Peter Menelauskas' name. Yes, name.
I practiced that for hours.
Yeah, I was, honestly, I was in the Riverland last December. I was a volunteer disaster and recovery chaplain, and it was dead quiet. Nobody apparently, this was after flooding, and it wasn't a normal relief operation because it was a slow-moving disaster, and I think a lot of people had actually organized their paperwork well in advance, so it was completely empty. And Peter Malinauskas walked in, and and everybody kind of sat up a little bit. Yes, so I said his name correctly then. But yes, the people who I meet who say, well, my name is Kumar, but you can call me Ken. My name is Vladimir, but you can call me Fred. I have a friend who's Israeli. His name is Ehud. He goes by Eddie, because Australians say, oh, your name, it's weird. I can't say it. So how affirming is that of my identity? When you say, I can't be bothered to learn how to say your name. Instead, I'm going to make it something that's more Australian. So you just have a little bit of a think about that. And yes, and even more so with our first Australians, I think that you mentioned Eddie Betts, and certainly the vilification that was directed against him was absolutely horrifying. And again, it just that simple action of pretending to throw a spear seems to have awakened something very deep and brutal and primitive in people. And I would, I would have advised those people to explore that. Where does that feeling come from? Is it rational? Why do you feel that way? And if we, as people who follow the Bible, and we go to Genesis chapter 1, this is another one of my 3 sermons, by the way. You got 2 out of the 3. We are created in the image of God. Judaism teaches only one person was created to show that no one can say, my ancestry is better than yours. That's a very, very profound teaching from Judaism. We are all created in the image of God, each and every one of us, regardless of what color our skin is, regardless of our sexual orientation, regardless of our gender, regardless of what language we grew up speaking, regardless of what faith. So we are called upon to live out that core teaching of being created in the image of a God and encountering others made in the image of God as well.